Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is a brief video discussing the concept of the really perfect, or what I like to call the strong thesis. Now, you have the readings at your disposal in the link above, but what I'm going to really focus in on is what a strong thesis is, what a weak thesis is, and I'm going to give you an example that is not in the reading here that will help you to understand the difference, okay? What I want everyone to really understand is a thesis is not restating a question. It is not one sentence. It is not simply echoing what other people say. A strong thesis comes from you as the actual author of the paper that is being written. You want to come up with your own idea. You want to come up with your own argument. And that's what a thesis is. A thesis is an argument that you spell out for your reader, letting us know what is the argument and how it's going to work throughout this paper. Okay. And last week, I gave you all the basic formula of what a thesis includes. Now, this is not to be bullet pointed. It is not to be numbered. It's supposed to flow in with your introductory sentence. And the formula that I gave you is what, so what, now what. Basically, the what is the problem? What is an issue? There are a lot of issues out there. Our authors talk about specific issues, which is great, and you might want to tackle one of those issues too. But what you want to then really focus on is, so what? What is so important about this issue as far as you, the author, is concerned? You're not David Foster Wallace. You're not Garnet Cottigan. Why is this so important in the world that you live in, the world that you see, the world that you experience? And now what? The now what is, how are we going to fix this problem? What's the problem? Why is it important? What are we going to do to fix it? If any of these three things are missing, then you have a weak thesis. All right? A thesis needs to be compounded. That means at the college level, it can't just be one sentence. It cannot be one sentence. It has to come at the end of your introductory paragraph. It just simply does. And it has to address those things. What is a problem or an issue? Why is that issue important to you or to all of us? And what are we going to do to solve that issue? And then the paper uses the texts, the direct quotes that you pull from one text and another text that you connect together. All of those paragraphs always support what the problem is, why it's important, and how we're going to fix it. Those three things, it's like a roadmap. Your introductory paragraph is a roadmap to the rest of your paper. And the fit it method is a roadmap to each and every body paragraph. It's like every single paragraph is a microcosm or a small version or a small example of the larger paper. Okay, I hope that makes sense. What I really want everyone to really focus on is it's on the first page of the thesis information that I gave you. Not all theses include this, but a good thesis, and what I want you to all focus on for these assignments moving forward, for like this first assignment and the first paper, I really want you to focus on how a strong thesis uses two key terms, not concepts, but those terms can be tied to concepts. Okay, how does it use key terms working with each other? These ideas, these terms, to guide how you understand the sources, but then how you can tie these sources together to formulate an argument about your own argument. Okay. What a strong thesis does is helps your reader, me, your colleagues, anybody else, to understand what it is that you're actually talking about. So you need to be direct. You can't tap dance around these things. You have to be specific and you have to be direct. So it needs to really help us as your reader navigate the rest of your actual paper. There's a set of ideas, and the set of ideas sometimes can come from your key terms. It's like, these are the words that we're playing with. And in each paragraph, you might be redefining them or reusing them in conjunction with each other. Since you're making connections between two different texts, two different terminologies, two different ideas, you want to see how they work together. Do they contrast, or do they contradict, or do they confirm each other, or do they complicate each other? And a good paper is really about complication, right? It's complicated. You know, problems are complicated. If they weren't complicated, they wouldn't be problems, right? So that's something that I want us all to think about. And then I want you also in your introductory paragraph, but specifically inside your thesis, is to support, you know, like illustrate how you're going to support this. So key terms are really helpful in that, okay? Your introductory paragraph sets the stage, and then your thesis comes at the end of it saying, okay, this ties everything together. So the stage setting is, what is it that we're talking about? Who are the artists or the authors that we're talking about? How do they kind of work together? And more importantly, how do they work together in the context of the paper that I am writing? I am not asking you to repeat what they're arguing. Okay? You need to come up with your own idea. And of course, I know that's a little bit difficult, and that's why we're working on it this week. We started last week a little bit. Now we're working on it this week. I know it's a little bit difficult, and you're going to be like, well, if I knew the answer to this, then I wouldn't do it. But that's what college writing is all about, is trying to come up with your own ideas, your own way of understanding the readings, identifying and addressing problems, and coming up with an idea how to fix it. And that's where it's really important. Now, a weak thesis, conversely, does not include the multiple lines. A weak thesis is one sentence. This is a problem that should be fixed. No. How are we going to fix it? Why is fixing it a very important thing? So if you only have one sentence, you're not doing your job. And if you're saying something really vague, then you're not being a good writer. You need to be specific. You need to be direct. You have to tell your reader why this is important, because if we don't know why it's important, why are we going to invest the next 3 pages into understanding your argument? You need to let us know up front. So a thesis is a pretty good idea layer outer, as well as a hook. It generates some concern, some anxiety, some interest from your reader, okay? And it goes beyond a true and false, okay? This is something, it's like, racism is bad. No shit. That's just true. We also breathe oxygen, and we are guided by the laws of gravity. That's just true. A good thesis has an argument in it. There is 2 sides or more. It's never as easy as just like one side or the other side. It's not so black and white. What I'm trying to get us all to think about is the gray areas. That's what nuance is. And I've been talking about nuance over the last several weeks, is I might agree with Cottigan up to a point, but then there's a thing that I disagree with. That's a great place to start with a thesis. And you will use critical awareness, or you'll use something like the concept of water, right? Well, it seems like Garnet Cottigan is swimming in a very specific type of water. David Foster Wallace helps us to think beyond that. So it's like, that's a complication. That's an argument. That is something that has maybe multiple interpretations, right? It's not black and white. It's not yes or no. It's not true or false. There is an argument that needs to be made. And that is what makes a strong thesis. If you only obviously are writing down something that is true or something that is false, and all you're doing is then reporting, then that's not a good thesis. It's a weak thesis. If you restate the argument of one or both of your texts, then you're not doing your job. And honestly, if the only thing that you have in your thesis is some sort of personal, anecdotal conviction, belief, idea, then it's not very helpful. Okay. It can originate from you and your own experiences, but what it needs to be, what a good, strong thesis needs to be, is it can be infused with the emotion of something particular to yourself. But it can't be only self-contained. This is not a personal statement. This is not a diary entry saying, this is what I believe, which is perfectly fine. But in an academic paper, you need to establish an argument that you take a specific side on. You are defending a position and you're fighting for why yours is the best way, not the only way, but the best way to fix this problem or to address this problem. Okay. And now I feel like some students might be saying, what the heck are you talking about? Well, our reading actually has some pretty good examples in it. And so I want you all to pay attention to these examples of strong theses and weak theses. Strong theses are really good to pay attention to, but I really kind of think that the best way to get good at writing theses is to see what a bad thesis is. You know, what I mean, as many people play sports, what do coaches always say? They always say, you learn more from failure, right? So I don't want this to be your failure. I want you to read through this section of the handbook on theses and see what's weak. And so you can learn from the failures of those theses. And you can get some good guidance from me. You can get some good guidance from the examples of strong theses and be like, I don't want to do that again. I want to do this. Okay. But remember, a strong thesis is multi-layered, not one sentence. It's not based on personal belief, personal ideology, or anecdotes. It is setting up an argument that you will follow through and illustrate in your body paragraphs why yours is the best way to go about fixing or addressing this problem. Now, the readings have some really great stuff in it, but I actually have a student paper, got their permission to use it, and I want to illustrate kind of how to go about developing a thesis and including it within an introductory paragraph. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen real quick, and I'm going to show you this. We are worth more than this. That's the title. Okay, and what I'm going to read through it, you can read through it. You can pause this at any moment that you want, okay? But I'm going to read through this just a little bit, and I'm going to illustrate where things that you need to do are there. The exploitation of the working class is far more common than one might realize, as we must sacrifice more than we should to make a livable income. Nice compound sentence. It's not machine gun sentences. It has a whole idea, and it lets itself breathe musically. When our needs are not being met by our employers, we also suffer meeting our needs outside of work due to lack of income, benefits, and overall time for our personal lives. Already, I'm kind of seeing that this is a paper that is going to be about people who are working, which is not anything having to do with the texts that were read for this paper. Many of us today do not realize we are being exploited, whether because we have bonded with our bosses, enjoy our field of work, or even believe that life is just supposed to be this way. Again, a great compound sentence, nice and musical. It allows an idea to breathe and to be reinforced by each clause after it. Some people even find it ridiculous to question the conditions in which we work today, claiming we should be happy to have a job at all and are just being lazy. So these first 7 lines are all about situating what this paper is actually going to be about. We are going to be talking about labor, people who work, and that we're not having our needs met. And some people might say that you should just be happy, but you know, that's not exactly where I'm coming from. It's what this author is saying. And then they introduce the author and text of one of their primary texts. Kristen Allred describes this fixed way of thinking in her article, The Causes and Effects of Filter Bubbles and How to Break Free. Oh my gosh, all it does is streamlinely or flowingly introduce, oh, here's one of the people we're going to talk about. And then it contextualizes specifically not everything that Allred talks about, but what Allred talks about in relation to what this paper specifically is going to be about. Allred describes the difficulty one might have in freeing oneself from their preferred mindset without even the willingness to hear the other side's point of view. While some people consider wanting to work less as being lazy, they are the ones who are lazy, lacking the will to change their own work conditions, not only to benefit their lives, but the lives of their coworkers as well. So again, this whole paragraph is situating the argument. What is the paper going to be about? What side of this is the author going to be on? And more importantly, how can we use one or both of the texts to illustrate or to exemplify or to amplify the argument that will be set up in the thesis? Basically, this entire paragraph is a roadmap. Conceptually, what are we talking about? Labor, people being taken advantage of. Some people think that you're not being taken advantage of, but you know what? We actually are. The problem is that we as workers are being taken advantage of. And why is that important? Because there's so many workers out there. And even the ones who don't think they're being taken advantage of are, and we workers who are trying to fight it are helping you too. That's why this is important. And what are we going to do to fix it? Similarly, in his speech, This is Water, David Foster Wallace describes how the ability to break free from our self-centered default setting mindset can allow us to become more aware of the world and the people around us, helping us to see the value in everything, even in ourselves. So this whole idea of filter bubbles and having a preferred mindset that Allred talks about is similar to, not the same thing, as default settings in David Foster Wallace. The terms are not the same, but the concept is there. So we're using Allred and Wallace as tools to prove this thing that I am talking about, that I, the author of this paper, am talking about. As you know, David Foster Wallace doesn't talk about people who are working and how the conditions are unfair necessarily, and he's not talking about labor. So what I'm trying to get at is your paper doesn't need to be exactly about what Cadigan and Wallace are talking about. It needs to be about your own topic, your own issue that you see as a problem. You need to tell us why that problem is important and that we should pay attention to it, and then fight for a way to fix that problem. After all, what is more valuable than us workers? The grammar's a little weird. Than us workers who maintain the entirety of production. That's the thing. What's more important than that? That's an argument. Some people can argue other ways, but this is an argument. I know that the author of this paper is on one side. They're not on the fence. They're not wishy-washy. They're like, workers, come on. I happen to know that this student is in the service profession, which I think that a lot of you might have been or still are in, whether it be retail, restaurant, healthcare, all of these things. Service professionals, very important, and people take advantage of us. Yes, we can come together, and I'm going to argue for this point, and that's why I have this in the highlighting right here. The exploitation of the working class must be stopped. This is a problem. The exploitation of the working class must be stopped. Why is it important? We deserve to be fairly compensated for our time, labor, and resources. Higher wages, ethical working environments, and better benefits are just scratching the surface. All of these things that like everyone is like, oh yeah, you should be paid what you're owed, and you should be treated ethically, and you know, if you're doing a 40-50 hour week, why don't you get benefits? That's something that a lot of people can get behind, but we're not getting it. This is why it's important. And what are we going to do? How are we going to address this problem and why it's so important? With critical discussion and unionization, we can come together to make it known that we will not settle for less than what is worth. So now this whole thesis identifies a problem, the exploitation of the working class. Why is it important? Because they need to be fairly compensated, and the things that people are even just talking about now are barely even scratching the surface. And how do we address this? How do we fix it? How do we address it? How do we work it? We need to really actually have a critical discussion, not like bullshit talking. We need to really talk about this. And you know what might actually really help is if there's a union, a servers union, a teachers union, healthcare workers union. If we have this union, then we can have some power to get this stuff. And then the paper is going to be using David Foster Wallace and Kristen Allred, two essays that do not talk about unionization, do not talk about labor, do not talk about social benefits or anything. They're going to use the concepts and the terminology that David Foster Wallace and Kristen Allred use to back up the point, the argument, the side of the argument specifically that this author is talking about. So that's what I want us all to work on for the thesis. I want us all to work on this idea that there's a problem out there. I don't care what the problem is. The problem is that some people, prefer cucumbers pickled. I don't care. That's an opinion. It's not really quite something that's a fact-based anything, but like if people were more critically aware and they would understand that, those pickles are swimming in water and that's okay, but cucumbers are just as good too. And here's the reasons why. And if we addressed why our country doesn't like, or our society doesn't like, or only likes pickles, and we're ignoring cucumbers, why is that problematic? It's because people only see things one way. So my paper is about pickles versus cucumbers. But really what the paper is about is this divisiveness and people clinging on to one thing, pickles, or the other being better than cucumbers. And how am I going to try to bridge this divide of this sort of ideological, fight? So what you're doing is that you're taking a specific small thing, and unionization and the exploitation of labor is not a small thing, but it's a specific issue. And you want to take that specific issue and argue one side of it using a nice, strong thesis. And the tools that you get, the concepts that you get from your texts. And you want to argue this small piece. And by the time you get to the end, you've proven your point or you've defended your side. And at the conclusion, then you can kind of open things up and say, pickles and cucumbers, it doesn't really matter. But when it comes to our society, we need to stop being so monolithic or unilateral. We need to open ourselves up and understand the beauty of cucumbers just. Or that I do enjoy pickles, but I can also understand that cucumbers are also coming from a good place. And in a manner of speaking, they're a lot more healthy for us. So while I prefer this one thing, I do see the benefit of the other, which could be said about religion, which could be said about race relations, which could be said about politics, which could be said about whether or not you like chocolate ice cream or strawberry ice cream. All of these things, a small specific thing can be blown up to a bigger thing. And that's what your thesis is kind of getting at. And that's what I want us all to focus on is your paper is about a specific thing. You use the texts to support what the problem is, why it's important, how we are going to fix it. The texts help you argue about this specific point. And by the end, it's actually this really small specific thing is actually really a lot bigger than just one specific thing, right? So avoid weak theses, but use weak theses as a way of not repeating what a weak thesis is. Make strong thesis statements. And I want you to make your own thesis statements. And that's what the assignment is going to be for this week. All right. I hope that that made sense. If it didn't, feel free to email me, contact me. We can email about it. We can Zoom about it. We can do whatever. If it's confusing, I want you to be not confused. Okay. And I want to make sure that you understand the importance of a thesis statement, not a thesis sentence. Okay. I hope this message finds you well. If you have questions or concerns, you know how to get a hold of me. And all right, smarties, go do what you do.